Welcome to Life Stories. Have you ever felt like you were invisible to the people who should have loved you the most? What if the moment you've been waiting for, the moment when everything would finally fall into place, was also the moment that shattered you? Tonight's story is about a woman who spent her entire life seeking approval from a father who never truly saw her, and a family who treated her love like it was a performance. But on the day of her wedding, everything changed. She didn't just marry the love of her life, she also had to confront the painful truth about who she had been trying to impress. Her world is about to flip, and what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, family, and what it really means to be seen. Let's dive into this unforgettable journey. The day Emily had dreamt of for so long was finally here. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of roses and champagne, and the soft hum of conversation filled the room as her guests eagerly awaited the arrival of the bride. She stood in front of the mirror in her wedding dress, adjusting the delicate lace that seemed to shimmer under the soft glow of the room's overhead lights. Her bridesmaids bustled around her, their laughter infectious, but Emily couldn't help but feel the tightness in her chest, the quiet undercurrent of tension she couldn't shake. For years, she had hoped for this day to be different. She had dreamed of walking down the aisle with the full support of her family, her father at her side, smiling proudly, her stepmother offering a kind word. But deep down, she knew that this was never going to be the fairy tale she had imagined. Janice, her stepmother, had always found ways to belittle her, to make her feel small. Her father, once her protector and confidant, had long ago distanced himself. It wasn't even a deliberate act on his part. It was the quiet aftermath of her mother's death, the slow erosion of their bond over the years. It wasn't the absence of love, it was the absence of seeing her, truly seeing her, as someone worthy of love. And now, as she stood there, ready to marry Jake, the man who had never once made her feel like she had to earn his love, Emily could feel the weight of their judgment creeping into the corners of her mind. Jake, her rock, her anchor, had always been there for her in ways her family never had. He had listened when she needed someone to hear her, he had held her when she cried, and most importantly, he had loved her fiercely without asking for anything in return. Still, the sting of their absence, of their cold indifference, lingered. She had spent so many years trying to earn their approval, bending herself to fit the mold they had cast for her. But no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. And now, today, on the biggest day of her life, she couldn't help but feel the familiar ache deep within her chest. She glanced at herself in the mirror again, trying to push away the rising tide of doubt. But the words of Janice echoed in her mind. She's just pretending to be loved. It's all for show. Her heart sank. Was that what she was? Just a girl pretending? Pretending to be enough for everyone? Pretending to be loved? The sound of her father's voice broke her thoughts. He had entered the room, glancing around without saying much. A quiet nod in her direction, but no words of encouragement, no warm affection. "You look ready," he had said. "Not beautiful, not radiant, just ready, like she was preparing for a job interview, not the most important day of her life." Emily's throat tightened, and for a moment she felt the weight of every unspoken word, every glance that had ever made her feel invisible. As the ceremony began, she walked down the aisle, her heart pounding, her eyes locked on Jake's. He stood there, waiting for her, a smile on his face that felt like home. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was her moment. This was the love she had always wanted. This was real. But the nagging doubts didn't fade. As the vows were exchanged and the crowd cheered, Emily's gaze flickered to the table where her father and Janice sat, their expressions unreadable, their eyes not on her but somewhere beyond her, as if they were waiting for something. The weight of their indifference bore down on her like a storm cloud she couldn't escape. She had spent so many years hoping for them to see her, to finally recognize her worth, but they hadn't. And here, on the most important day of her life, she felt the full force of that absence. She wasn't the daughter they had hoped for. She wasn't the person they saw when they looked at her. The reception began with laughter and music, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, judged, dismissed. Janice was seated at the head table, her posture perfect, her smile just shy of condescending. Every time Emily glanced over, Janice was looking around, evaluating, her eyes sharp, cold. And then it happened. Just as the cake was being rolled out and the MC readied the mic, Emily overheard Janice's voice, clear as day. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She leaned toward Emily's Aunt Marlene, one of the few relatives who had shown up, and said it loudly enough for Emily to hear. "She's just pretending to be loved. It's all for show." And then, as if the universe had decided Emily hadn't been hurt enough, her father laughed. It wasn't the awkward, uncomfortable laugh one might give in a social situation. It was a full, amused snort. "She's lucky Jake even showed up," he said, shaking his head. The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She felt everything inside her freeze. The room, so full of warmth and light just moments ago, felt like it was closing in around her. She looked down at the champagne glass in her hand, her grip tightening, the glass cracking under the pressure. She wanted to disappear, to run away, to tell everyone what had just happened, but she didn't. She couldn't. Not today. Not in front of everyone. But something inside her shifted. As she walked outside for a moment, her heart still racing, she looked through the window and saw Jake laughing with one of his cousins, completely unaware of what had just been said. And in that moment, as she watched him, a quiet resolve washed over her. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had his. How many of us have lived a lifetime trying to earn someone's love, only to realize we were already worthy of it? What would you do if the person you love most finally stood up for you in front of those who never truly saw you? The air felt different as Emily turned to rejoin the reception. Her heart, still raw from the words, now pulsed with something new, strength. But she had no idea what was coming next. All she knew was that Jake was about to change everything. The question was, would she be able to hold on to the truth he was about to speak, or would it unravel everything she thought she knew about herself? The reception hall had fallen into an uneasy hush after Jake's speech. The air hung thick, a strange mixture of awkwardness and disbelief. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she sat back at the table, the weight of the moment still pressing down on her. She could feel the eyes of her father and Janice boring into her, their silence louder than any insult they could have shouted. Jake had spoken the truth, and for the first time in her life, it wasn't just her words that had been silenced, it was theirs. Emily glanced over at Jake, who was sitting next to her, his hand resting lightly on her back. He wasn't looking at her, though. He was staring straight ahead, his eyes locked on her father, who was still avoiding her gaze. His jaw was clenched, his brow furrowed, as if he was bracing for a storm. And yet, as the moments passed, the storm didn't come. No one said anything. No one moved. Not a single person dared to break the heavy silence that had enveloped the room. But then, as if to punctuate the tension, the silence was shattered by the faintest sound, the tap of heels against the floor. Emily turned to see Janice standing up, her gaze cold and calculating, her eyes locked on Emily's, and for a moment, Emily felt as if the entire room had shifted. Janice's lips curved into that all-too-familiar tight smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She opened her mouth, and Emily braced herself for the cruelty that was sure to follow. "Well," Janice said, her voice smooth but laced with venom, "it's nice to see someone standing up for her for once." She paused as if letting her words sink in before continuing. "But I have to say, Emily, it's a little too late, don't you think?" Emily's stomach twisted. She knew what Janice was doing. She was trying to plant seeds of doubt, to undermine Jake's words, to make it all seem like a game, a performance. But something about Janice's tone made Emily's blood run cold. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about exposing every flaw, every crack in the facade her family had built around her, and Janice wasn't going to stop until Emily was left standing alone, her past laid bare for everyone to see. "Don't you think it's a little pathetic," Janice continued, her eyes flicking to Emily's father, "that you needed him to defend you? I mean, all these years, and you couldn't even get a word of support from your own father." The sting of Janice's words hit Emily like a slap to the face. She could feel the heat rise in her chest, the rush of emotion threatening to choke her. Her father, her own father, had never stood up for her. Never. And now, after all this time, she realized something. Something that had been slowly creeping into her heart over the past few years, but had never fully crystallized until now. Her father didn't see her. He never had. She was just a reminder of a life he wanted to forget, a life he couldn't bear to revisit. And now, standing in front of him in her wedding dress, she was still that little girl invisible in his eyes. But something inside her began to shift. She wasn't going to let Janice or anyone else continue to define her. Not tonight, not ever again. Emily stood up suddenly, the action almost involuntary. The room fell into a stunned silence as she pushed her chair back and stood tall, her hands trembling at her sides. Jake looked at her, his face filled with concern. But Emily didn't look at him. She didn't need to. This was her moment. It had to be. "Janice," Emily said, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier with each word. "You've made it clear how you feel about me for years, but you know what? I'm not pretending anymore. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not, just so you can feel comfortable in your little world. I don't need your approval. I don't need my father's approval." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I don't need anyone's approval. I'm done shrinking for you, for him, for anyone." The words hung in the air, raw and real, and Emily felt the weight of them settle deep inside her. She could feel Jake's gaze on her now, but she didn't look at him. She couldn't. Not when the truth was finally out. Not when she was finally, truly standing in it. She had spent her whole life trying to prove herself, trying to make them see her, to love her the way she had always deserved. But tonight she was done. "I'm not a project to be fixed. I'm not a joke, and I'm not a problem to be solved," Emily continued, her voice stronger now. "I'm a person. I've always been. And if you can't see that, then that's on you, not me." She turned to her father then, her heart pounding in her chest, her words aimed at him like arrows. "You were never there for me, not when I needed you most. And I spent years trying to earn your love, trying to be what you wanted me to be. But I'm not doing that anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Emily's father didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at his wine glass, his expression vacant. And in that moment, she realized that the man she had spent her life trying to win over wasn't the man she needed. She had Jake. She had her own strength now. With that realization, Emily turned on her heel and walked out of the reception hall. Jake was right behind her, his hand gentle on her back as he guided her through the doors. As they stepped outside, the cool night air hit her skin, and Emily finally let herself breathe. She had said the words that had been trapped inside her for so long, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But as they stood there in the quiet of the night, something unexpected happened. Jake, always the calm presence, his face filled with concern, turned to her and said the one thing she hadn't expected to hear. "Emily," he whispered, his voice low, "I never stood up for you because you needed defending. I stood up for you because I knew you've always been strong enough to defend yourself. You just needed someone to remind the world of it." The impact of his words hit her like a wave crashing against the shore, pulling her under. She had always thought that she needed someone to fight for her, someone to speak the words she couldn't. But Jake had never seen her as weak. He had always seen her for who she truly was, the woman who had fought alone for so long, the woman who had survived. Have you ever felt like you needed someone else to fight for you, only to realize that the strength you were searching for was already inside you? What would you do if the person you loved most gave you the courage to finally stand up for yourself? The night was far from over, but Emily knew one thing for certain. Everything had just changed, and she wasn't going to back down now. The real battle was just beginning. The night had fallen silent, save for the soft hum of distant conversations and the rustling of leaves in the cool breeze. Emily stood with Jake outside the reception hall, her heart racing from the whirlwind of emotions that had just unfolded. It felt like the storm inside her had finally cleared, leaving only the quiet, raw truth behind. Her eyes lingered on Jake, the man who had shown up for her in ways her own father never had. He was still there, by her side, his gaze steady and reassuring. The same man who had just torn down years of silence and shame, not out of anger, but out of love. And in that love, she found something she had never allowed herself to believe was possible: acceptance. For the first time in her life, Emily didn't feel like she was chasing after something she would never catch. She wasn't chasing her father's approval. She wasn't chasing Janice's validation. She was no longer running after their love, their recognition, or their forgiveness. She had her own love now. She had Jake's love, her friends, and a newfound strength that was hers alone. But as much as the silence outside offered peace, there was still something gnawing at her. Something she hadn't fully addressed. Her father. He was still there, sitting at the head table, a stranger in his own daughter's life. Emily had spoken her truth, but she hadn't given herself the space to process the pain of his absence, of his indifference. Her father had always been a quiet presence in her life, but tonight, that silence had been deafening. It had never been about the loud words or the cruel remarks. No, it was his silence, the absence of any real connection, the unspoken distance that had grown between them like an impenetrable wall. The silence had been there long before Janice's sharp tongue had entered the picture. "Jake?" Emily whispered, her voice breaking the stillness between them. "I don't know if I'm ever going to get over the fact that my father never saw me. Not truly." Jake stepped closer, his hand finding hers in the darkness, warm and comforting. "You don't have to," he said softly. "Not anymore." But Emily shook her head, feeling the weight of the truth settling in her chest. She had spent her life trying to prove to him that she was worth seeing, worth loving. She had spent years in the shadow of his disappointment, waiting for him to finally look at her and say, "I see you." But that moment would never come. Not from him. Not anymore. As they stood there, Emily realized something that made her heart ache with both sorrow and relief. She had been waiting for him to give her what he could never give her. She had been waiting for him to say, "I love you," but he wouldn't. Not in the way she needed. And that was the hardest thing to accept. But the moment she accepted that truth, a weight lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't going to keep living in the shadows of what her father couldn't give her. She wasn't going to keep pretending that his love was the only love that mattered. She had love now. Real love. The kind of love that had always been there, waiting for her to recognize it. Emily and Jake stood in silence for a moment, their fingers intertwined, as the soft glow of the reception hall flickered behind them. She could feel the weight of the years of longing, of wishing for something that would never be, begin to melt away. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was hers. This moment, this realization, was all hers. "I think it's time to go back in," Jake said, his voice low and steady. "It's your day, Emily. It's your time." Emily nodded, taking a deep breath, and with a final glance at the dark sky above them, she turned back toward the door of the reception hall. Her heart was still raw, still fragile, but it was no longer filled with the weight of her father's absence. For the first time in her life, she felt the freedom that came from walking away from what no longer served her. As they stepped back into the room, the air felt lighter. The tension that had once consumed her now seemed to dissolve. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, it didn't matter. She had stepped into her own light, her own strength, and nothing, no one, could take that from her. The rest of the night passed in a blur of laughter and dancing, the kind of joy that could only come from being fully present in the moment. Her friends embraced her, offering words of love and encouragement. Jake never left her side. He had been her anchor throughout it all, and now, as the night drew to a close, Emily felt as if she was floating on air. When the final guests had left and the last song had faded away, Emily and Jake found themselves standing outside once more. The moon hung high above them, casting a soft glow over the quiet street. Emily looked at Jake, her heart full, her mind finally at peace. "You're everything I've ever needed," she whispered. Jake smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "And you're everything I never knew I was waiting for." As they kissed under the stars, Emily knew that everything she had been searching for, everything she had longed for, was finally here, in this moment, with him. She didn't need her father's approval anymore. She didn't need Janice's approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had herself, and she had Jake. And that was more than enough. What does it take to finally stop seeking approval from those who don't see your worth? How do you let go of the past and step into the future when the weight of the past still lingers in your heart? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Do you relate to Emily's journey? If you love this story, comment 100 below and let me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who might need to hear this story. Thank you for being part of the Life Stories community.